My sister lives in the community where Jean-Benet Ramsey's family lived in Boulder, Colorado, and her kids actually participated in this church Christmas pageant with Jean-Benet. Jean-Benet played a lovely angel in the scene. We all have a role to play in the story of Mary having her baby. Mary is presented with this startling revelation that she's going to have a baby. Unfortunately, she lives in a time before Planned Parenthood, and she doesn't live in Illinois where they allow partial birth abortion. In many ways, Mary represents someone who, she has the skate and the Lord has the key. Mary's not being asked to have a baby. She's being asked to help someone else have a baby. Welcome to Illinois Bridging Awareness. I'm Stanley Smith. At Illinois Bridging Awareness, we're kind of navigating the terrain between looking for a solution, a fix, and waiting for a shift. This week, in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about silence and nothingness and providing an opening, and in the process experiencing presence of mind. We're watching for signs, for symbols, and how these make us feel. On last Saturday's call, people mentioned the idea of seeing light coming into the world and being aware of the intensity of light. Jeanette Hurt mentioned that she's noticed, spectral colors in the form of rainbows and prisms in her life recently. Roxanne Burrs mentioned that she was struck by the symbol of the all-day sign for the first time. We also talked about the idea of gifts and receiving gifts versus being bestowed upon or having something bestowed upon us. And the idea that not everybody necessarily wants the gift. Misa Edwardson shared with me recently that she's afraid to meditate because she's afraid of what will happen. I talked to Kelly in Adams County this week, and she talked to me that more often than not, she feels like she's kind of in a fog. And I love that because I told her, I said, well, maybe she should embrace her inner fog. I'm not a big meditator either. I'm kind of like Misa. I don't know. I'm afraid. I'm afraid what will happen if the mask gets ripped off. But the idea of being in a fog or being exhausted or tired, I feel that that's my meditative process is being half in the bag most of the time. I do most of my best work when I'm completely exhausted. Things come to me and I feel that's my passive way of being in a meditative state. We're not necessarily in the mode of offering tips or suggestions, but Kelly shared a fun thing where when she has issues with a person at work or somebody she's trying to frame in a context that she can deal with or chill out on, she literally chills out. She writes the person's name or issue on a piece of paper, puts it in water in an ice cube tray, and then freezes it. And I especially like that because it's a concept, it's an idea, and it's an activity, and it's a transformation because she's physically writing the person's name or issue she's acknowledging it on a piece of paper, and then she's putting it in water, and then she's transforming it by turning it into a block of ice in the freezer. And I think that's got a lot of things going for it. It's the recognition, and it's the focus, and it's the allowing for a transformation process or a shift to happen. So I like that. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I like the concept of it. It captures a lot of good parts. We also talked about things that trigger us and being aware that we can very easily be triggered. And it probably sends us down an unproductive path. We can have the concern, see the concern, but not get triggered down a fight, flight, or shutdown mode, which really just continues this endless cycle. So we all have our triggers. Actually, Sherry, no, that's not Sherry. Who is that? Cheryl mentioned that recently she had joined the Baptist Church of Danville. And, we talked about the word Baptist, that, Baptist can be a trigger word, but we were able to discuss the topic and she was able to join the church, even though previously the word had been a trigger for her, because she was able to step aside. She was able to shift around the trigger and experience something that she hadn't expected in the Baptist Church. And I think we're all happy for that. And we don't have to be triggered by any particular word. Jim Downs had the message this last week about the presence of mind, was one of his topics. And I was intrigued by that. And it conveyed the idea of being calm and discerning and being open for an inner knowing. I think he used the word stoicism because somehow stoicism came up in this topic. And I did look into the word stoicism, and stoicism, similar to the word of Baptist and many other words, has a lot of baggage and has a lot of negative connotations. I think in our world, we think it's unfeeling, unkind, and kind of a brutal, kind of a not being very sensitive or observant person. But in fact, it means being open and accepting. The word idea of accepting whatever situation you're in, and in many ways not being triggered by it. So it gave examples of not immediately having an opinion. It also gave the example of valuing your opinion over other people's, which can sound narcissistic, but if we can't be our own guide, then I mean, how we can't really, we only have ourselves to ultimately decide what's best for us. We certainly want to listen to other people's opinions, but our opinion should be valued slightly higher than other people's opinions. It also gave the example of Napoleon. Napoleon was someone who was known for not reading his mail or his correspondence for months, because his philosophy was that in most cases, the issue would be resolved, would resolve itself without having to react or be triggered by it. I recently had that very experience when I've been very busy here in my professional life, and I've been too wiped out to pick up my mail when I return home at night, and until the doorman told me that my mailbox was literally overflowing. So I decided to take 2 weeks worth of mail to breakfast one morning on a Sunday morning, and I sorted through the mail as I was having my breakfast, and it was the regular, checks and bills and a lot of junk mail. And I came across an envelope from Northern Trust Bank, and usually I just put those in a folder because those are usually a statement or a night depository slip. But for whatever reason, I opened up the envelope from Northern Trust, and the letter said that a check had recently been presented against my account for $11,000. And I thought, well, I don't remember writing a check for $11,000. And I thought, well, I wonder what I was spending $11,000 on. But for whatever reason, I had absolutely no reaction. And I just put that in the pile. And I continued with my breakfast because I thought, you know what? I'm going to worry about that later because I'm having breakfast. The letter did explain also that the $11,000 check resulted in a negative balance in my account of $5,000, but the check was paid nonetheless, which was additionally fascinating because in 30 years of banking with Northern Trust, I mean, if I'm a nickel short, they will bounce that check. So it was fascinating on many levels. I continued digging through my mail casually and putting a junk pile aside and a bill pile aside, and until I came across another envelope, just a plain envelope with a P.O. box in Pittsburgh return address, which on first glance looked like junk mail solicitations. I didn't recognize the entity or the return address in Pittsburgh, but I opened up that letter, and it was from a behind the scenes processing center, a subsidiary of Northern Trust Bank I had never heard of, and I'd certainly never gotten correspondence from it. And it was informing me that they had encountered an encoding error, that a check for $1,100 was mistakenly encoded as $11,000. So I was fascinated by that, kind of the behind the curtain message to me directly from the processing center, informing me of the error, and that apparently the issue had been resolved, just like Napoleon's philosophy. On the call on Saturday, Debbie Dixon has been on my mind, and I was thinking about Debbie. We've never seen Debbie, but I always like hearing Debbie's voice, and she always has a very calming and reassuring demeanor. And I asked Debbie, I said, well, I've been thinking about you and what I think your gift is. I think your gift is being calming and reassuring, but I was curious to know what Debbie thought her gift was. And Debbie said that her gift is being the observer. She's there to observe. And I could relate to that because in many ways I feel like I'm simply monitoring my lifetime. I'm actually not enrolled in this lifetime for credit. I'm simply monitoring the class. In my past, I was transgressed. I had a past life transgression session with a hypnotist many years ago, and uh, my past life started. My first remembrance of a life was in literally in ancient times, and I was in some kind of a desert landscape on a mountaintop, and across the desert plain to the east, you could see an ocean far off in the distance, and to the west, similar scene, a vast emptiness and a distant ocean. I remember being kind of in an exalted, calm state. And I thought, well, this is very peaceful and meditative. My next life seemed to be in Roman times, and I was some sort of a guard or soldier of some sort. There were a lot of chariots and armor and swords involved. And that life ended when I was overcome by a mob and killed with my own sword. My next life was in France, where I was a tailor and my wife was a seamstress. And I seemed to always be feverishly cutting fabric with an endless amount of work. It seemed like we were eking out a meager existence, and it was kind of a grim scene. The last life that I recalled in my transgression was, or transgression was in the American Dust Bowl. I was a farmer with a wife and kids, and I wasn't able to support my wife or children any longer because literally everything dried up and blew away. So the message from my experience was that my life seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse. So perhaps that's my guide for being just an observer in this life, because probably living my life fully in this life could simply be too dangerous. I think in some ways that makes us wonder if perhaps we're having our worst life ever. It was brought to my attention by my sister that there's a new film coming out this spring called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, and it's about that very topic of choosing your worst life possible. The premise of the film is that in our life we have all these choices, and all the choices we don't make continue to reverberate out into the universe as all the different possible lives we could have had. And in this film, this main character, this Miss Wu, is she's been identified as someone who's unique in the world because she has made literally all the worst choices, and she's having the worst life she could possibly have. In the film, she runs a dry cleaner, she has a daughter, and she has a husband who's filing divorce papers against her. Jamie Lee Curtis plays an IRS agent who's auditing Miss Yu. In one of the scenes, Jamie Lee Curtis has a desk covered with stacks of receipts. And she says to Miss Yu, you know, you see just a stack of receipts. But she said, I see a story here. And she says, the story does not end well. I thought that was a very interesting premise, and the idea that, you know, life has many joys and happinesses, but it also has many disappointments and setbacks. And a lot of these things are cumulative in a lifetime. We've talked about on this call the idea that, you know, we're probably in the older, well, we are the older end of the spectrum, and without realizing it, we're in the second half of our life. And part of this situation, feeling, viewing the world as half empty as versus half full, is just circumstance of life of getting older. If we look at literature and biographies and other people's lives, we can see that there is a pattern of in every good story there's always a bad part. And that's fine. We can accept the consequences of life. We're in this difficult position between being somewhere between the divine and the not so divine. It's not an easy thing. Where life is not an easy scenario. So we get that. But on top of that, I brought this up before, the idea that within the history, the circumstances of history and life events, you know, they're enmeshed together. So we have our own personal trajectory, and then we have the trajectory of history. So that's something I think is unique, and we can point to as that's impinged. It's impinged on our personal trajectory. The idea of this increasing frequency of disruptive events. So I'm sure there's more previous to 9/11, but 9/11 seems definitely like a turning point. I explained to young people what life was like before 9/11, that the phrase I'll meet you at the gate was was common. Never thought about it. Walking through the terminals at the airport and meeting people at the gate was a common and casual and fun experience. It was part of being uh, hospitable and friendly and kind of welcoming. Later, we had the housing collapse and the financial crisis. And as this all has moved along, we've had our phones monitored and all of our calls recorded. We've had our liberties infringed. I also share the idea with young people that life used to be so much more fluid and open. You could just hop in a cab, go downtown, arrive at any downtown skyscraper, run into the lobby, push a button, and you'd be on the 57th floor without ever being asked who you were or where you were going. After all these events, then we had the lovely pandemic narrative layered in on top of it all. Karen Etter recently told me that we could look at all these things going on as a kind of a reverse brainwashing. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it, that all these danger, 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 turn back now signs are kind of a way of reverse brainwashing, because we know intuitively that all will be well, but for some reason we need to go through all this as a form of reversing some of all these negative disappointments and life events. And hopefully the end result is providing an opening. I think that's what we've been trying to do here by default. We really didn't know what we were set up for here in Illinois. We all started out in Connecting Consciousness, which was on paper a very large group, almost, I think we were heading toward 2,000 people. And after we got divested from Connecting Consciousness, we're a smaller group, but we're pretty much the same core group that we were before. So unintentionally, we've all been vetted and screened for whatever availability or purpose. And during the last few weeks, we've been talking about the openness and the nothingness and the silence and the waiting. And then all of a sudden, just popped across our radar was this concept of the General Assembly. So similar to Mary, in many ways, we were the roller skate, and the General Assembly people seemed to just show up at the right time with the key. So we provided the opening by being here, waiting. We've been literally waiting in the wilderness. Do any of us fully understand what the General Assembly is about? I mean, we really don't. I've defined it basically as the idea that our republic has been subverted and that we're being called to form a General Assembly to hold elected officials accountable. And that's the simplest way I can describe it, even though all the details of that are fuzzy to me. So I think if you've been following the story, I think I can assure you that you know probably as much as I do, but many of us are willing to take um, take a chance. We're risk takers, and it's only to our advantage to pursue it. I also explained to some people reluctantly that um, in describing this, I've unfortunately felt like Nancy Pelosi, that in many ways we're in a situation where we just need to pass this thing so we can find out what's in it. It might feel like all the warning signs say danger, 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 turn back now, but I think I can assure you that all will be well. We all have a gift to give, and we're not being asked to have a baby, we're being asked to help someone else have a baby. If you would like to join us on our Illinois Bridging Awareness Journey, I will include my email in the description of this video. We have a statewide Zoom call every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time. I will be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.